Welcome to Picks with the Professor, the show where an actual statistics professor gives you sports betting tips. I'm your host, Professor Sides, for the latest updates and information. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook, and for extra exclusive free picks on TikTok. This college football episode covers select games from week 14 of the 2022, so all the games from week 14 of the 2022 season. It's conference championship weekend, and we're going to cover it all. I'm going to bring cousin Jared and our friend Jake on momentarily. But first, in case you're new here, check out the webpage on the banner. It's www.pickswiththeprofessor.com/new for a primer if you haven't been there yet. Otherwise, the goals of this episode are to share key information about these games, give you a few things to think on, explain why certain plays are being made. We never recommend blindly tailing or fading any pick, but rather to hear the justifications and thought processes to make sure you're fully on board with us or against us before investing your hard-earned money. We'll make a pick on every game, but you take what you like and leave the rest. Remember, there are no locks in gambling and that good and bad variance will occur. So as much as we'd like to say we'll be profitable each and every week, that is an impossible reality for any gambler. And viewer, you may have noticed there, a part of the spiel that I usually said at that moment, I didn't say. And the reason for that is after looking through our performance on specifically the A, B, and C grade picks, I found that the A picks weren't performing as well as we'd liked, and in fact had actually done worse than the B and C grade picks. I don't want to bore you with math necessarily, but of all the plays that cousin Jared and I collaborated on in the 6 weeks that we did that, the A plays were 10 games under 500, and all the other plays were 26 above. And I think it kind of goes to show something that we had debated, talked about, discussed a little bit, which was, the plays that we kind of liked sometimes turn out better than the ones that we really thought we had a good read on. And why is that? Football's a high variance sport. The turnover battle can really affect things. And we had so many games where, just to take this last weekend, for example, we finally were on the right side of one of them with Alabama covering that number where probably shouldn't have. We got that one. But so many where the opposite thing happened as well. Even this last weekend, several games that went on, the South Alabama game, we missed that over by half a point. And that had a touchdown taken off the board. The Western Kentucky under missed by like 1 point because going to double overtime. So weird things like that happen. And I think what we kind of learned looking at the data was we probably shouldn't put more or less units on games. And I think the final nail in the coffin for that was we went with that approach for Saturday and said we're going to add a unit to a lot of those C grade picks, especially where the numbers had gotten better. And that turned out to be, I think, a profitable decision by one game. And we had a handful of games that we held back. There were 6 games that we held back and said, maybe we shouldn't add a second unit. These are the ones that we really are. It's where we lean, but we just didn't feel that confident in it. And those 6 games, I believe, went 5-1. So it was kind of the final nail in the coffin to say, if we're leaning that direction, we should play it. And if we like it anymore, we should just play it at the same confidence levels going forward. Because in general, we're just going to make picks on games. There's going to be no weighted heavier or weighted less. The top of the top picks have been doing okay. And for those, you can check us out on the plays of the day. But otherwise, again, we're just be making picks. We're not going to recommend on these games more or less on something. We'll talk about if we like it more, but those plays haven't really done any better, and statistically have been no different than the plays we liked a little bit less. So we're just going to make them all the same. We've been right at about 52% since we've been collaborating. So right around that break-even mark. The only reason that the units aren't there is because we've been waiting poorly, as I just discussed. Hopefully, changing that up will fix that going forward. And so with that said, I will bring cousin Jared along. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm guessing you're doing better, not having to sit there and smile at the camera for that whole spiel, right?
Yeah, it was nice kind of sit here and just, drink my beverage and just kind of enjoy listening to you tell the listeners why we're doing what we're doing. So, yeah, that was much more enjoyable just sitting here stone-faced while you were reading it.
I feel like I should say, is there anything that I left out? But I feel like I already know the answer is you're just like, no, whatever, it is what it is.
No, that's what I said before we came on. You're the math guy, so you got to tell them, hey, the math wasn't showing this was working out. So, I think you covered everything.
Yeah. All right, and we'll also bring on Jake for our conference championship episodes. He's going to make his picks as well. Jake, long time no see.
Yeah, it's been way too long, I guess, since Saturday?
Well, I meant for football, but touche. For football,
yeah. Missed a week there, but
all right.
Sorry.
All right. Well, before we get to today's show, some reminders. Please hit that like button if you're on YouTube. Also, if you aren't yet, please consider subscribing or following. It's free. And if you turn on notifications, you won't miss any of the college basketball, MLB, or college football content this channel provides. And a reminder, we've got that Patreon if you're looking to get some extra benefits. Membership starts just $3 per month to get you the plays of the day. And there's other tiers to get you all sorts of other fun benefits if you're looking for a little extra. But if not, like I always say, we're thrilled to have you here. Get right to it. All lines courtesy of Bet Online. Sign up link in the show description. And current as the all lines, I said we have an asterisk to that at the very end of the show we'll talk about. But otherwise, sign up link in the show description to current as the time of this recording here on Sunday night. We're going to start off Friday afternoon with the makeup game from the crazy snow that hit Buffalo. Akron and Buffalo, I don't know if they were going to play this game had Buffalo won this last week. Maybe someone knows the answer. I don't know if they were going to play it either way or if they were only going to play it for Buffalo to get the 6 wins. Either way, a big game for Buffalo, and you would think an easy opponent in Akron, except for the fact that Akron last week looked like a competent football team.
What the hell was that? I mean, where did that come from, Akron?
Right. And it's like at some point, if they'd won, you'd have been like, oh, whatever, like bad teams win all the time. But the way that they played in that game, clearly they're going to go out and fight and try to win. They did last week. They clearly haven't thrown in the towel. Sideline rates Akron after that performance has them up to 125th. I've got Buffalo at 97th. The model says it should be Buffalo minus 14.1. The actual spread is 13.5. Because of Jared, we're going to take the over 47.5. Do you have any insights for us as to why?
If Akron's going to play like that this week, then this is going to go way over 57.5. And I think, honestly, I don't want to say this is what I was waiting for from Akron. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, they're Akron. They're not a good football team. But, I mean, how many times does a MAC football team get a head coach with the pedigree that Joe Moorhead had and kind of the rep for being such a good offensive coach? And so I was expecting them to get a bump on offense. It just took the entire season. But hey, let's say that they're rolling now. And, again,
better late than never.
Yeah, better late than never. And Akron's defense still, regardless of what happened last week, is not very good. I think Buffalo is going to put up a lot of points. Like you said, they've got everything to play for, a potential bowl game on the line. So I see a lot of points in this game. This one definitely feels, 42-21, something like that, and easily goes over 57.5.
And the weather right now, we're talking Sunday night. This is a Friday afternoon game. So, which is weird, by the way. That's at Friday afternoon. I don't know what's going on with that, but either way, weather right now looks good. It's a long ways out. But weather looks like it'll just be a chilly day, nothing too crazy as of this moment. Jake, you're taking Buffalo and the over, is that correct?
Yeah, I am.
So my concern for Buffalo is the way they just collapse these last several games. I thought they had this last week because Jared and I had a pick on Buffalo, and they looked like they were running the way. When all of a sudden I turn around and it's tied. The way they've collapsed, I think that's my only concern with Buffalo. Otherwise, I completely agree with you. Buffalo is a much better team, and they should go out and put up a ton of points, and that should help them cover this number. I like that it's under 14, but I think Cousin Jerry and I just couldn't get there. So you are the Mac daddy. Your record in the Mac games has gone really well. So I'll let you tell the people why, in addition to the over, which you also like, they should also lay the 13.5 with Buffalo.
Yeah, so Buffalo, you got to think Akron shot their shot last week, right? That was the end of the year, last 100-meter sprints to finish the marathon. And so they gave everything they had. I don't think they've got enough in the tank to keep this one close, especially with nothing to play for. They thought their season was done. Here they are playing 6 days later or whatever it is. So it's just I don't think they've got enough in the tank here, really. They're playing better recently, so I think that's going to help the over. But I think it's going to be a blowout territory. I think Buffalo wants to get ahead and cruise. And I mean, the better they play, the better they look, maybe a better bowl game they kind of get for the 6th win rather than some of the weaker bowls. So they've got a lot more to play for. It's really about the spot. I think Akron doesn't – if I was on the Akron team, I really wouldn't be interested in this game too much either.
Yeah. And I just did a quick look at it. It does seem like this game had been rescheduled, so it was going to happen either way. If Buffalo had won and had been 6-5, you feel like this would have been a real bummer of a spot for both teams. I guess Buffalo did us all a favor in losing because now there is a little something on the line. I don't really know. Either way, we all like the over 57.5, and Jake also is telling you to lay the 13.5 with Buffalo. To the conference championship games, probably what you've been waiting for here. North Texas and UTSA, Friday night at 7:30 Eastern, a rematch of a game that was a little bit closer than the experts thought the first time around. This game will be in San Antonio. UTSA is an 8-point favorite. Sideline says it should be 11. We're going to lay the 8 here with UTSA. Sideline's got them ranked 52nd. I've talked about them a lot this season. A pretty solid team, either average or maybe even just slightly above average relative to the rest of college football. North Texas, though, I've got ranked 74th. They've made a bowl either way. Because, Jared, why is laying the 8 the right move in this game?
I think North Texas, I think they started off the season not that great. They kind of went through a really good point in the season where they were just crushing teams. They killed Florida Atlantic. They killed Louisiana Tech. They played a close game with UTSA. They beat Western Kentucky. But then and they beat Florida International, which, a lot of decent teams beat Florida International.
Although Florida International flips a coin and either shows up or literally just sends out a high school team. That is the most bipolar team I have ever seen at play college football, I feel like. Yeah,
I think you're probably right on that. But then the last few games, UNT just hasn't looked the same. They lost to UAB by 20. UAB team that only finished 6-6. We like to think of UAB being a really good team. Their team was not that great this year, and then only had a 4-point victory over Rice this past weekend. So when you flip around and look at UTSA's season, I mean, they got the triple overtime loss to Houston, and they got the loss to Texas, and that's just about it. I think UTSA had their letdown spot this past weekend where they spotted, I'm blank, UTEP approximately a billion points.
I think it was game. 21, but whatever it was
it was a lot.
I thought that you can't watch every game. I thought the score bug was flipped. I was like, I just assumed they've got it backwards here. There's no way this is happening.
They did not, and somehow still managed to come back and win that game. So I think that was their hiccup. I think they're going to come out ready to play this week, and I just don't see North Texas being able to keep this close based on how they've played the past few weeks. I mean, and this was one of those things where North Texas needed to put their best foot forward and play their best football to get a chance to be in the conference championship game, and they kind of just got fortunate that the way that things fell that they were able to make it. So I think UTSA is going to blow them out. This is what UTSA has been looking forward to all season. They want to be Conference USA champs, and I think they just put the pedal to the metal here and don't let up.
Yeah, only one other 7-5 team playing in conference championships. Like I said, definitely lucky to be there. And I'll add, I could be wrong on this, but my perception here is that UTSA is more of a team that it was concerned about the big picture. They were concerned about winning the conference, getting to the conference championship game. North Texas, like I said, had to focus on the individual every single game. And to me, that's a situation where now that UTSA just gets to focus on one game, that greatly benefits them because now they can kind of just say, okay, now this is it. And obviously the bowl as well. But UTSA, looking at that big picture, maybe is why they only won that first game by 4, where, like you said, North Texas was throwing everything they got every single week to try to get here. And I think that plays into UTSA's advantage here. They've seen North Texas' best shot. It's obviously on the wrong side of 7, but it feels like a situation where, again, sideline says 11. That's why we have the model to help us see these types of things, where maybe we're concerned about the wrong key number, that we should be more concerned about the 10s and the 14s rather than the 7s. And that this could be a runaway game with UTSA's firepower that I'm not sure they've really let out of the barn most of the year. I mean, they really haven't taken that car for a spin quite yet too many times. They haven't needed to, and now this game and the bowl game are the times to do it. So Jake, what's your take on this game?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, don't really have a take on this one. Since basketball started, some of these smaller schools that I really not a fan of, haven't paid attention to enough, so I'm not going to make a pick because I'm not even going to play it myself.
It's a game between two Texas schools, so of course Cousin Jared and I are a little more honed into the Texas schools, right?
Yeah.
All right, to the other Friday night game, must-see TV right here, Utah and USC. Total in this one is 67. This line has moved a lot. It started off around a pick 'em. It's up to USC -3 right now. Cousin Jared, you and I are holding off on the side here. I think we like Utah either way. So this says Utah should be a 1-point favorite. I've got Utah ranked 9th, USC ranked 11th. And I know that people will say USC's 11-1, Utah's 9-3, or they'll talk about how good USC's looked lately. And that's absolutely true. But when you look at the totality of everything, a one point loss, right? Not being much different than a 1-point win, that situation, that type of thing, that the schedule that the two teams have played, they're pretty similar. And that's why, again, I've got 1-9, 1-11. I just don't think that they're as far apart. And if you said USC really should be 9th and Utah 11th, I'm fine with that. I mean, we're talking about a really close discrepancy here. I know their records are a little far apart. And if you ask for a resume ranking about how their resume stacks up, absolutely, USC should be playing for a spot in the college football playoff. I would not disagree with that at any point. What I'm trying to do is a predictive metric, not a resume metric. From a prediction standpoint, I think these two teams are pretty even. So giving me a field goal with Utah or the plus odds makes a lot of sense. But I think we're waiting for 4 or either better odds in the money. And I'm just going to kind of wait and see on that, simply because USC didn't kick a lot of field goals. So if USC is going to win, I could easily see them winning by 4. Obviously, go by 7. It's never going to get to 7. So there's no point waiting for that. So just kind of see with the way this number is going, kind of what happens before you officially jump in. We like Utah. Maybe you grab 3. Maybe you wait for 4. Maybe you just take the money line. We'll make an official pick on that later, depending on what the number does. But the other pick that we are locking in on this one is the over 67. Cousin Jared, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts on this game in regards to taking the points. I mean, how can you watch that first game they played this season? If you could get something like 3 or 4 points or plus odds on the money line, how could you not feel good about that? That game was back and forth. USC got
on
out.
Either side, really. It wouldn't matter which side.
Exactly.
On either side.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with this. So, I just like taking the points in that situation. The other thing is, it feels like there's just so much pressure on USC in this spot, knowing that they win the game, they'll probably get a spot in the college football playoff. I mean, that's just a lot of pressure. I'm sure that the players are relishing having that pressure on their shoulders, but it is still a lot of pressure. So I think taking the 3 points with Utah there is valuable. And again, these two teams played earlier this season. And again, how could you watch that and not say, oh, yeah, I'm going to go over 67? There was never really any doubt that game was going to go flying over whatever number had been set. So I think you're going to see a lot of the same thing here. You got to remember, this is a Lincoln Riley offense. It's going to find a way to put up points. I think if Utah wins this game, it's because they scored a lot of points as well. So, yeah, I think the over 67 is a great play as well.
And I want to add two things to that real quick to wrap us up, and then I'll turn it over to Jake. First off, with regards to total, we'll talk later about a total in a rematch where I think, hey, something might play out a little differently. I don't see why anything would play out any differently here. Both of these teams have been high-scoring, weaker defense. I know there was a lot of talk this last week about USC's defense hearing the negativity and playing with pride or whatever. That's a bunch of crap, in my opinion. Those guys go out there and play hard every single week, right? And if you want to tell me they don't, maybe they don't against, Sisters of the Poor or whoever, right? The FCS team, whatever, sure. But in conference play, you're telling me they weren't playing hard against UCLA? Come on, right? Like, I'm not going to buy that they had this 1 week in practice where like, oh, well, now they heard they weren't good, so now they're going to play harder this week. I'm telling you, they played their butts off as well as they could against UCLA. And they just aren't that good. Their offense made up for it because their offense is fantastic, right? So I just don't see anything playing different. Utah's kind of been the same way. Their offense has been really good this year. Their defense hasn't been as good as it's been in years past. Yep. So I just don't see anything different playing out. I think we're going to have a lot of quick scores. You saw in that Notre Dame game, a team that doesn't really like to pass, wants to run the ball a lot, still passing kind of all over USC and still getting that game over a number in the 60s as well. This one, I think, goes flying over the number. The last thing I want to say is I just have to point out as a Baylor fan, Baylor last year playing Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams in this style of offense held them to 14 points. So I'm just saying it's possible to stop this offense. It's just nobody in that conference has been able to do it. Utah wasn't able to do it the first time. I don't think they can now. If they go up against the Michigan, it can happen. Or Georgia, it can happen. Like I said, Baylor was able to do it last year. Baylor had a great defense last year and a great scheme. If they get to the playoff and face either one of those teams, I think you're going to see that offense get stopped. But it hasn't happened in Pac-12 play, and I don't see it happening here on Friday. Jake, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, the over is the safest bet here. I mean, you've got 2 average defenses at best that against 2 very, very good offenses. I mean, and throw in the fact that you've got the stealth mission to get Caleb Williams to the Heisman winner that's going perfectly to plan. So they're going to put up points and put up numbers for him, especially with this win. Like, if they win this one, I think the biggest factor of this is there's no die for USC in this one. He was responsible for a touchdown and a little over 100 combined yards from scrimmage. He was a big threat. he doesn't have the USC doesn't have him anymore. So I think that takes a weapon off the table and just weakens that offense just enough for Utah to win. So I'm going to take Utah with the points. I'm going to wait and see what the money line does. Play that probably towards closer to game time, but I don't think it's going to get much better than 3. If it does, I'll eat it. But I'm going to go ahead and get the field goal in this game. That should be a toss-up.
All righty. To the Saturday games, Big 12 championship here in Arlington, Kansas State and TCU, another rematch of a wild and fun game that already happened this season. And that one, you did have some Kansas State quarterback injury situations there, kind of hindered them. But, I mean, both teams were scoring like crazy. And I kind of copy what we just said in the previous game and apply it here. I don't see either one of these teams really being stopped. They don't play quite as fast necessarily as like USC has been playing most of the season. So maybe a few less possessions, but the offensive efficiency for both these teams is through the roof here. You saw what TCU was able to do against Iowa State. My goodness, Iowa State, I feel like Iowa State allowed as many points in that one game against TCU as they did the whole rest of the conference season. I mean, you can at least add like 3 or 4 games up and get to that many with how well that defense had looked all season. TCU just lit them up. Kansas State's lighting everybody up as well. Over here, also a great pick for us. And kind of the same thing as with Utah. Right now, this number is at 2.5 for Kansas State. Cousin Jerry and I are holding out for 3, maybe looking at money line, just kind of seeing how that plays out. Sideline says this should be TCU minus 1.6. I've got TCU ranked 12th, Kansas State, and not far behind them. So a situation where that's not 12. Sorry, 12 wins. I've got them ranked 8th. I've got TCU ranked 8th. The wrong column. There's number of wins. It's 12 wins. So TCU ranked 8th. Kansas State right behind them at 10th. TCU should be a small favorite, but if you can get 3 in this game, overtime's on the table. Last minute as a bowl wins kind of on the table. Plus odds. Same sort of thing we talked about with Utah and USC. Just maybe a little bit fewer points, but still able to clear the over 61.5. Because Jared, what do you have for us here?
I think Will Howard is a big difference maker for Kansas State. We all thought Adrian Martinez was, kind of lifted their quarterback play, and he definitely did. But then Howard came in. He's just been even better than that.
Lifted it even more.
Yeah, and so you mentioned all the, because even Howard got hurt in that TCU game. So I think having a full game of him going, I think TCU is going to get a great fight from Kansas State here. Think taking the points is a great option. And again, as you kind of alluded to, I don't see either team stopping each other here. So, I mean, that just, like I said, Howard and the 1-2 punch of him and Deuce Vaughn is pretty impressive. So, like taking the points with Kansas State, wouldn't mind taking the money line with Kansas State potentially. And yeah, I think the over, you got a lot of good options in this game.
So in this game, and again, the Utah USC one, Cousin Jared and I are taking the over in both those games. And we're taking the dog. We're just waiting to see what the number does, what the money line does, but we're on the dog. And it's not that we think the dog necessarily wins. What we're pointing out is the fact that these should be tight, anything type happen ball games. So taking points or plus odds makes a lot of sense. We talk about this more in baseball all the time. Where in baseball, we say, hey, if it's a 50-50 game, but you can get plus 120 odds, you make that play every day of the week. And it's that same sort of logic. Absolutely, USC and TCU could win. The playoff committee is obviously hoping that happens to make their jobs easier. I'm not saying I think that will happen or there will be chaos. I don't really know. I'm just saying these should be fantastic ball games. I think they should be pick'ems or -1s. And so if we're getting field goals or some big, some decent plus odds for who the heck knows type games, that is worth mentioning. Also worth mentioning for the previous game, I'm treating these both as true neutral sites. USC is going to travel fairly well. Utah always travels really well in Vegas. I expect that to be relatively 50-50. Both those teams, like I said, Utah always travels really well. Same thing with Kansas State. They travel really well also. So people will say, oh, it's TCU, it's Fort Worth, down the road from Arlington. Kansas State fans historically have traveled extremely well. I expect there to be a lot of purple in the stands. I'm not really sure how it'll go. Yeah, thanks for laughing, guys. How the split will go, but I think there'll be a lot of fans from both teams there. So I'm treating both these as true neutral site games because I think that there will be a lot of fans from both teams on both of them. Jake, what's your take on the Big 12 championship game?
Yeah, I'm going to stay away from the side because I don't have a clue what's going to happen, and I don't feel comfortable either way. But I'm all over the over. Like, this is ridiculous that it's set this low for this game. TCU had 3 games all year that was under this number, and one of those is that weird Texas game, and then Kansas State had a few more, like I think 6 total, but 3 of those times were just like extreme blowouts where.
Well, one was against Tulane. Yeah. One was Tulane, which is completely Tulane and TCU. Tulane's a good team, but they're just totally different than TCU is.
Yeah, and then like you had the 31-3 or something against Baylor, and then not to rub it in. There's a few of those like blowouts where they just got no help from the other team. They did their part. So I think,
and the Iowa State game, who drug everybody in under except for TCU. That but yeah, it's against the teams that play offense. The scores have been pretty high for the most part.
Yeah, so that I don't see this game being close to this number. I think it flies over. I think halfway through the fourth quarter, we're like, wow, was this ever at 61? Go ahead and cash that ticket.
I believe the first game had 66 points, and honestly, I think this one might have
two hurt quarterbacks.
Because part of that game was Martinez, who looked good, but Howard came in then and looked better, and then Howard came out for a couple drives, and I wouldn't be surprised if this game gets in the 70s.
Yeah.
All right, the other noon Eastern game on Saturday, the MAC championship game, Toledo versus Ohio. This one is in Detroit. I've got Ohio ranked 76th, Toledo ranked 78th. So both these teams pretty similar. I've got Ohio as a slight favorite. So we're going to take Ohio plus 120 on the money line. This is where it benefits you to be part of our Patreon, whether you had the early access to the lines when I posted those. You would have seen that I made this a pick 'em and you would have grabbed the Ohio plus 3.5 in a heartbeat. Or if nothing else, if you're on our Discord, we talked about this. I told everyone multiple games. One of them was this one. I said, hey, y'all, Ohio plus 3.5. I'd be eyeing it. And then it dropped to 3. And I said, hey, y'all, last chance. Ohio's down to 3. Jump on it now. So I gave people multiple warnings there on that Discord of where this was going and told them to jump for that key number. Set at 2.5 now. I don't know if it goes back to 3. I don't see why it would personally, but you just never know with line moves. So for our official pick, because we can't take lines that happened in the past, and we don't want to give you stale numbers, at least as of now. I don't know what it'll be by the time you watch this, but as of now, being at 2.5, we're going to go plus 120 on the money line. I think grabbing the points in money line, splitting your wager makes a lot of sense here. I just like what I've seen from Ohio. Toledo I don't know what to make of Toledo. Ohio looks good right now. Toledo looks, and it's not just Finn. I don't know. They just don't look good to me. I really like what Ohio is doing here. We're also going to go with the over 57.5. Toledo defense is terrible. Toledo allowed 20 points to Western Michigan. You're like, 20 points to Western Michigan. Y'all go back and look at what Western Michigan's done the last several weeks. They've been scoring like 10 a game. So Western Michigan doubled their output against Toledo, right? If Ohio doubles their output, they're going to get to 58 by themselves, right?
They might get to 100.
Yeah, if they don't, yeah, exactly. So I'm not necessarily predicting that. I'm just making the point of Toledo's defense is really bad. Ohio's going to score a lot of points. I don't know what Toledo does, but I think the combination of grabbing the money line here at plus odds for Ohio and the over makes a lot of sense. Cousin Jared, what do you have to add to that?
Aside from a game that we're going to talk about later, where Coastal Carolina is without their starting quarterback, I'm not sure, in my opinion, that there is a conference championship game with two teams going in opposite directions more so than this one. Ohio is 9-3. Their losses this season, they lost to Penn State, they lost to Iowa State, and they lost in overtime to Kent State early in the season. That was actually their first conference game. They won every single conference game after that. They finished the season on a 7-game conference winning streak.
Pretty dang good.
Yeah,
and not bad non-conference losses, those two either.
Yeah, and none of these games were relatively close. I think the Ohio offense is really good. As indicated, we're going to take the over as well. But you go over and look at Toledo, and it's just kind of like the exact opposite. They looked good early in the season. Then they lost 3 out of their last 5. One of their victories, they had a 7-point win over Ball State. They had multiple chances to clinch their spot in the conference championship game earlier. And I don't want to say they backed into it because, they got such a big lead in their division that they kind of, they didn't have to do much. And
did they back in or did they coast in?
They kind of coasted in.
At best they coasted. At worst they backed. Whichever one is not great.
Yes, they lost their last 2 conference games. They're still got a spot in the conference championship game. So I just have not been impressed with what I've seen with Toledo all season. And the exact opposite. I've been very impressed with Ohio. I'm shocked that this line isn't at a pick 'em at the least. Personally, I would have made Ohio a very small favorite. So I think getting a plus 120 on the money line is a fantastic fantastic investment. And again, the over. I mean, who's stopping who in this game? I think Ohio's going to score more, but Toledo I think is going to get upper 20s at least, and I think Ohio's going to go way above that.
Yeah, I like you was shocked when I saw the 3.5. That's why I went to this score. I was like, y'all grab the 3.5. Like, this is stupid. Again, Sideline says pick them. I was surprised, or Sideline says Ohio basically -1. I was surprised. I really thought this would be Ohio -3, and maybe it gets there. That's the direction it's going. I have no idea, right? But I just figured, I was like, the way Ohio's been playing, I was like, we're gonna have to pay a premium on Ohio. I'm just shocked we've got value on Ohio. Like I said, I was fully expecting to be like, guys, do we pay the premium and back Ohio, even though we're paying it? But they look so good. And like, not having to have that conversation just floors me. Like you said, Cousin Jared, tremendous value. Jake, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm all over Ohio. I couldn't wait, especially when I saw it was plus money. So I'm just so impressed with the Ohio team. I mean, you lose a guy like Rourke, and you expect the team to kind of go down. And their offense really stayed about the same output, but it's a different way of doing it. They totally switched. Like, credit to their coaching staff. I'm not exactly sure who it is, but they went from a pass it almost all times offense to we're going to go with a mobile quarterback and let him run. And they're just killing people. I mean, they've yet to score
with like one week of practice. I mean, it wasn't like it was it was just like 1 week. Okay, let's do this. Now we're going to be good at that too.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, they've scored at least 24 points in every MAC game, and most of the time they were in the 30s. So I think there's going to be very easy for this to go over the 57.5 number, and I think they win. And I think they kind of win in a blowout because whether you think they coasted or backed into it, it is really hard to flip that switch back and get that game going, and like all of a sudden get back to where you were. I think Toledo's going to – they might come out hot, and then I think that coast button comes out early on them, and I think they'll end up losing big. But that's my take on the game.
Yeah, credit to second-year coach Tim Albin. Last year they were terrible. Yep. First year, a lot of times talk about a year zero, right? That sort of thing where you're just like you're coming in, you're trying to lay the foundation.
Well, and Frank Solich retired like in July or like August, like right before the season started, and so he had a couple of weeks, basically just the start of camp, to kind of get things the way that he wanted to do things, and so maybe that's explainable looking back on it.
And he was there, but how much of that is what you want to do, and how much of the recruiting? I mean, it was just a weird situation there. But credit to the job he's done here in year 2, or if you want to call it year 1 after the years, whatever that is. This year, just a fantastic job of that team. So we all like Ohio on that, and because Jared and I are also taking the over 57.5. Speaking of the game you just talked about there, Cousin Jared, 3:30 Eastern on Saturday, the Sun Belt Championship game. This will be at Troy. They are now 9.5-point favorites. Another shameless plug for that Discord, $5 a month. When this line came out, it was Troy -7, and I said, y'all grab Troy -7. It's already 9.5. I don't know where this number's going. Sideline says it should be 14, and that's partially because of just how bad Coastal Carolina has looked without McCall. Part of that last week, I can give them a little bit of a pass for that. We talked about, I thought they'd show a better effort than that, but how much of that was an offense without the quarterback, and how much of that was we don't want to show anything for the next week, the game doesn't mean anything. I thought they'd play better than that. I kind of thought, even though the game didn't mean anything, that they would say, going into James Madison, and say, we want to say what?
Need the reps, like to practice with your new guy.
Yeah, need the reps with the new guy, and a little bit of, we don't want y'all to win the division and us just get there because y'all are ineligible. We want to go out and show y'all we are the best team, that sort of thing. I mean, there's pride in that locker room. You have to assume, and they just look terrible. And so, based off of that, again, Sideline says it should be Troy -14. We're locking in Troy -9.5. We're also locking in this under 48. Cousin Jared, I feel like this is Sunbelt's been your area, so I'm gonna let you have the floor.
This is going to be probably my shortest analysis of the night. Number one, Coastal Carolina, just not the same team without McCall. And both these teams have been heavy under teams all season. And so at this point, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's stick with the under 48. Could be potentially a little intimidating, laying 9 points with Troy, just because that's not the type of game that they want to play. But again, you just look at what Coastal's done without McCall, and it's just not promising at all. They scored early against James Madison, and then they did literally nothing the entire rest of the game. And so I just don't have much faith in them. They might be able to scheme up some points in the first couple of drives when they're on script, but I think they're going to have a really tough time after they get off script.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about, team totals, and when we like a side and a total, that then implies a certain team total that we would like that. And absolutely, I think we would recommend the Coastal team total under as well. Right now, the implication is about 19. Those are not out yet, but assuming it's somewhere around that 19 number, because I think we would both say that whether you want to lay the points with Troy, whether you want to go full game under or go Coastal Carolina team total under 19, all of those are fantastic looks, I think, in our book.
Yep.
Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm probably going to regret passing on this, but I just don't trust Troy to win by 10. I missed the 7. That's just me not paying attention in the Discord. There's
a lot happening there.
Yeah,
we have a lot of chat.
Yeah, so it's just I'm going to regret doing it. I just don't trust their offense to win by 10. I think they'll dominate the game for sure. It's just not in their DNA, it seems like, offensively to win by 10. But I definitely don't want money on Coastal with the way they've looked and no McCall. So I'm skipping.
I'm going to throw this out there and just see how y'all react to it. Because Chris and Jared, you made the same comment, right, about people might be afraid to lay the number with Troy. Here's my counter to that. Troy played that game against App State. They got out big and then let App State come back. And that was just a crazy game. That was all the way back in the middle of September, right? After that, Troy beat Marshall by 9, which, given that Marshall is also a heavy under team like that, that game was 16-7. That was like as big of a blowout as you could have for getting that 23 points. It feels like, unless it was 23-zip. Then Troy beats Western Kentucky by 7. After that, they beat Southern Miss by 17. Then it felt maybe like they coasted a little bit. And I think what we're reading is these 4-game stretch where they only beat Texas State by 3, they only beat South Alabama by 4, they only beat Louisiana by 6, and they only beat Army by 1. I wonder how much of that was just coasting and not really, kind of just what with UTSA, not, taking a big picture view, not really every single, we've got to win this by as much as we can, that type of thing. Because the last 2 weeks, they beat Louisiana Monroe by 18, and last week they beat Arkansas State, who Arkansas State's terrible, but they took care of business and won that game by almost 30 points. So I wonder how much of that mid-stretch there was just a little bit of concern for, or we're overly concerned about that. But if they now come out and focus, they can take care of business and they can cover a bigger number. I'm just curious how y'all react to that.
So I would personally say that I think Coastal without McCall is worse than South Alabama. I think they're worse than Louisiana. And I kind of throw Army out the window, like non-conference game in the middle of the season, running it, the triple option like that. Just kind of throw that out. That I don't think that really has any bearing on anything.
It feels a lot like Southern Miss, who they won 27-10 against, right? If this game went 27-10, I think we'd all be like, that sounds about right.
Yep.
Yeah. My only thing is they needed that South Alabama win, and right to win the division to put them here. Because if I might be mistaken, but if they would have lost by some unbelievable reason to Arkansas State, South Alabama would have got in, I think, to the championship tiebreaker
Something
stuff.
like that,
yeah. But so I don't know. I'm just not comfortable doing it. You lay out good points of why they should, especially as bad as Coastal is without McCall. I'm not going to knock anybody from doing it. I'm just personally not comfortable enough.
All right, to the American Conference Championship game, UCF at Tulane. This will be a 4 p.m. Eastern, again at Tulane. I've got Tulane ranked 27th, UCF 34th. UCF. Can we chat? Just have a little conversation? Yeah. What in the world was that about? If you weren't going to cover that game, that's fine. I get that, that's roughly a 50-50 proposition. But I tweeted this out, like if that game was when they make the movie in 10 years of the 2022 South Florida season, which thankfully they will not, but if they were to do that and they played that last game out real, your significant other, your child, your whoever who didn't see the season would be like, so tell me how that last game really played out, because I know it wasn't like that, right? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Got up huge and then just completely fell asleep. Tulane took care of business against Cincinnati.
But not like a little nap, like a deep slumber. Like just completely like they were not waking up for hours. Yeah.
Yes. Tulane takes care of business against Cincinnati, and thus they are able to not only make this game, but to host. Southern says it should be Tulane minus 3.7. We're locking in Tulane -3. We're also going under 56. Because Jared, tell us why.
So on the side, I think it's just really difficult for a team to beat a good team twice in the same season, especially going on the road both times to do it. So that's partially why, or at least me personally, I lean towards Tulane in this game. What I would say about the total is, so when they played earlier this season, they got to 69 points, which was nice. But the problem is that there were a lot of points early in that game, 24 points in the first quarter, and then the scoring kind of tapered off after that. UCF did a great job of scheming up those first few drives to get a lot of points off of Tulane, and again, they only ended up with 38, got 17 of those in the first quarter. I think it's going to be very difficult to do that to this Tulane defense twice within the span of a month. I think that the second game is going to be much more lower scoring. I think both teams probably threw a lot of their big offensive shots at each other when they played the first time, because that was a really big game in the conference standings for both teams. And I just think that they're not going to have as many bullets left in the chamber this time.
Especially given the weird thing that they're doing, the Big 12 has to do by default, and that the Pac-12 is doing, which is just maybe one other conference just do it the top teams. Like, that was a huge game because it wasn't just you needing to win; it was also you giving a win and a tiebreaker to someone, and you didn't know how those tiebreakers are going to play out. So, I mean, like you said, absolutely huge game the first time around. What I'll add on this is, look, I think Tulane's just a better team. I trust them. I don't trust UCF at all. UCF's had some really good games, had some really bad games. Tulane's a better team at home, and I think that. You made some great points. This is the one game we talked about. It's a rematch, and I do think it'll play out differently. The other thing is that Tulane, I think, kind of got playing UCF's game a little bit. They got behind, chasing, trying to score a little quickly. So I think there's some correlations here with regards to Tulane and the under. If you are a parlay player, this is one that I might recommend parlaying those two together, because I think they're correlated. Might get a little bump in probability, a little more positive expected value play there, because if Tulane does slow UCF down early on like we think, it allows Tulane to play their game, which is going to help them win and keep it low scoring both. And so I think both those things are going to happen here. I just don't see UCF doing it offensively like they did that first time. And so that's why we are laying the 3 with Tulane and going under 56. Jake, what is your take?
Yeah, that first game has got me all confused. So I lean Tulane, but I'm going to wait and watch what this line does. I've got a feeling it's going to move away from Tulane here and kind of make me angry that I didn't take them earlier. But I'm hoping I can get it under that 3.5, so I can, because I think it's going to be really nip and tuck game, and that field goal is going to be important. So I'm hoping I can get 2.5, but not confident in it.
Yeah, this is another one on Discord. I told people to take the 3. There are a lot of 3.5s already out there, so I don't know where this number's going to go. But this is when we were there. I said, hey, grab the 3 with Tulane. Again, sideline says 4. Even 4, I'm not sure I'd lay 4. 4 is probably a pass, but Tulane -4 feels like the right side, but I would hate doing it for all the reasons, Jake, you just said. At least laying 3, you got the push protection in case it does end up being a tight game, being a low scoring game, being more likely to be a tight game, etc. So yeah, lots of things to consider there with this number potentially really mattering. And again, 55 being the most key number in college football, so going under 56 or at least under 55.5 is very important. So be shopping around, make sure you get good numbers on this one officially, because Jared and I have locked in Tulane -3. Even laying some juice, that's okay. And going under 56. It's a Mountain West game, 4 p.m. Eastern, Fresno State at Boise State. Sideline says this should be Boise State -3. It's exactly where it is now, but it opened up and sat for a while at 4.5. This is another one where if you had those early projections on sideline, you'd have seen the 3 and said, hey, maybe grab Fresno State plus 4.5. That number's long gone. I don't see it coming back. I think 3 is a pretty good number. I don't know what to expect in this game. Boise's maybe a tiny bit better. So that's got them 50th, Fresno State 55th, trying to figure out what's going on with their offense and account for Fresno appropriately. It's kind of trying to see how they've done lately and give a discount for the time when Hainer was out. Still think Fresno good, just maybe a tiny bit behind Boise on the road. Again, 3 I think is a pretty good number here. So Cousin Jared and I are going to pass on the side, but we're going to go over 53. This game got to 60 the last time these two teams played. Both of them have been better on offense. Both of them are decent on defense, good enough on defense to slow down and stop teams with bad offenses, but they can give up some points to better offenses. I think both these offenses are actually rolling. I can't believe I'm saying that on Boise State after the first few weeks they had, but their offense is pretty good the last half of the season. Fresno State's offense with Haener, of course, has been pretty good. So we're going to go over 53. Weather right now looks good. Because, Jared, what else do you have to add to that?
I don't think we talked about it enough on this show that Boise fired their offensive coordinator after that loss to UTEP, and then since then they have definitely.
We didn't talk about that probably at all.
Yeah, they played a lot better since then. They scored 35 in a game, 40 against Fresno State, 49, 28 against BYU, 41 against Nevada. I mean, these are some bad Mountain West teams, but the scoring output definitely went up because the offense that we saw from Boise State at the beginning of the season was going to have trouble scoring points even against those teams. And then the second half of the season, they kind of put them away. But I would just say, Fresno State, since Haener came back, they've put up 32 on San Diego State, 55, 37,
32
41.
on San Diego State. I mean, that's all you need to say right there.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And then 30 against Wyoming last week, where Wyoming scored a grand total of 0 points. And so they had no incentive to score that many. So I think that both of these – I think Boise's offense is underrated for what it's done in the second half of the season, and I think that some of the projection systems just haven't caught up to how good Fresno State's offense is with Haener in there. So those 3.5 games or so that he missed. So, love the over here. Aside, couldn't tell you which one. Don't trust either of these teams too much. Again, that's part of why we're passing there. But yeah, I think the over is a really good place to look.
At some point, is this a game where maybe you would recommend a flyer on the money line plus odds on Fresno State? Kind of like we said, don't really know what to expect. Or is that one of those where on the road, you just don't think you'd mess with it?
I could definitely see that because I really don't feel like I know what would happen. And so I think that, especially if this got down to like 2.5, definitely I would lean money line towards taking points in that situation.
All right, Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and grab the 3 with Fresno, and this is another one that I'm going to probably play on the money line too. I just think Jake Haener makes this team leaps and bounds better than what the projections look at right now because of how much he's set out. And I just don't trust Boise to be there when they need to be there. So I'm also going to grab the over because Fresno could do this by themselves if they need to. But I don't think that. I think this one gets closer to the 60s. I think we're looking like upper 30s for Fresno and then low 30s for Boise, but either way, I think the over hits for sure, and I'm all over Fresno too.
The money line I'm seeing right now is anywhere between plus 130 and plus 145. Money line prices vary, so definitely shop around there. But I'm thinking of those like something like that plus 130, plus 140, plus 150, whatever you're looking at there. Seems like a reasonable idea, just because kind of anything can happen in this game. So talk about some of the other ones. Just take the plus odds, and it's tough to go there and win. Boise has a really good home field advantage. I don't want to discount that at all, but we're seeing from Fresno some signs of what we hoped they would be all season and got derailed with the Haener injury early on. But we're kind of seeing what we thought we might see here at the end of the season with how good they've looked since he's come back.
Yeah. I mean, we were on them early, I believe, and then they almost beat. Was it Oregon State?
Oregon State was a very tight last minute game.
Yeah, and then after that, Haener gets hurt, and it just kind of throws their season off.
Yep. 4 p.m. Eastern, last one in the afternoon here, LSU and Georgia for the SEC championship game. Georgia is a 17-point favorite. Sideline says it should be 15.6, so no mathematical edge to be had on either side here. 17 is a key-ish number, but not enough probability that the model would recommend taking the 17 with LSU. Right now, grabbing the 17 with LSU would provide a negative 1% advantage, laying the points with Georgia, according to the model, be negative 4%. So from a just pure mathematical standpoint, model says there's no edge either side. The question is, what do we make of either one of these teams? I'm going to ask a lot of questions here, Cousin Jared, and then I'll let you see if you can answer them.
Okay.
First off, let me get a couple of the things out of the way. Sideline's got LSU at 15 right now. Georgia, of course, back to number 1 in the country. Total on this one, I believe it's 49.5. Georgia's looked like the best team in the country at times. And at times they've looked, I don't know, disinterested, all the way back to that Kent State game, which I feel like we're trying to set a record for how many times we can reference that, even on the basketball show, which we did the other day. The first half against Georgia Tech this last week. So, I mean, from the very start almost, not the very start, because that first game against Oregon was just dominant, right? And then that Kent State game early on, and then throughout this conference season's been like that, where they just had some games where they haven't really looked that great. They've looked concerning, like they're mortal, and they've had moments like that Oregon game or like the second half of the Georgia Tech game where you're like, oh, they are doing exactly what they need to do. LSU, just as crazy. I mean, the loss to A&M, inexcusable with regards to you got a chance to, and obviously they face huge odds against Georgia, but knowing that if they are able to beat Georgia and they took care of business in College Station, they got a decent shot at the playoff, and blowing that game, looking, concerning against Arkansas, but of course, looking terrible against Tennessee, but also, they played pretty well against Alabama, right? So it's one of those things where I don't know what to make of either one of these teams. We've officially locked in Georgia minus 17. Because Jared, tell me why.
Well, let me ask both of you. When was the last time that Georgia won the SEC? What year?
Oh Lord, that was was it their last national championship year? Not before. Not obviously not.
I'm going to guess 1980.
Well, no. Jake's on the right path here. It was 2017 was the last time that they won the SEC.
I just figured if you're asking, I was going to pick a random really far back year.
Well, where I'm going with this is Georgia's been good every year for the past 5 years or whatever it's been, but they haven't been able to win the SEC. And so I think that you talk about looking ahead to this game against Georgia Tech. Looking ahead, I think that they've got a real bad taste in their mouth after not winning the conference championship game last season, losing it to Alabama. I think that they're I know this is going to sound dumb for a team that just won the national championship, but I think they're going to say guys, we haven't won our own conference. We've got to win this game and finally get this trophy to put in our wherever we're going to store it at, because how can we be national champs?
Generally a trophy case, but whatever.
Yeah, they're probably running out of room in that trophy case at this point.
They are probably running out of room in the trophy case, but I promise you they made some more. Yeah, they've made some space for this thing, and it's missing. And I promise that Kirby Smart's been harping on that all season. The other thing that I would say is such a big part of LSU's offense is Jaden Daniels running around and making plays with his feet. I think that it's going to be very difficult to do against Georgia's defense. I think that they're going to have the athletes, as my wife's grandfather would say, who was a Texas high school football coach for 40-something years. He would say they got a lot of good athletes out there. And I think Georgia's going to have one too many athletes on defense. It's going to be able to shut Daniels down. And if he's not making plays with his feet, I think things get really tough for LSU's offense. So I think laying the 17 points is the right move here. I think Georgia's going to come out trying to prove a point, and I think this game could get ugly.
Okay, I've two things to add to that. Number one, Georgia did win the SEC in 1980, so there you go. Also national champions. So,
they did also win it in 1980, yes.
I feel good about that. Second, to close back to your thoughts there, I will say that LSU has looked inconsistent and at times very concerning. And if that team shows up and good Georgia shows up, this could be 49-3. I don't know if it'll get that bad. It could be. The bad LSU is going to really struggle against the good Georgia. Good LSU might show up. You never really know. But I'm more concerned about LSU, and I'm willing to give Georgia a little bit of a pass, almost for the same theory I talked about with UTSA. I talked about with Troy. At some point, there's a little bit more of a big picture looking at this. They're not really necessarily focused on every game. I'm at least willing to give Georgia a little bit of a pass on some of the times they haven't looked as good this season. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. I'm just, again, that's why I said at the top of the show, I'm trying to give you some things to think on. That's my analysis here is I can at least give Georgia a little bit of a pass. What I saw from LSU against A&M, what I saw against LSU from LSU against Tennessee, even against Arkansas for the most part, it's harder to give that a pass because those were games they had to show up for and they didn't. Whereas Georgia hasn't had a game they had to show up for all season, really, other than maybe Florida, who they got up by 20 some odd points in the first half. Oregon, I guess, which they showed what they can do there.
Well, in Tennessee, I think that's the other game that you can look to, and you say that look at what Tennessee's offense did against Georgia's defense, which Jake, wasn't much, and you wonder what is LSU going to do against that defense? Because I think you're going to get that same type of effort from Georgia's defense this game as you got in the Tennessee game. So I just don't know what LSU is going to do on offense in this game.
So for me, this would be a C grade pick on Georgia, but at the top of the show, the C grade picks have done just as well. C and B grade picks are about the same, as good as and maybe I'm a little bit hesitant, but maybe I shouldn't be, because maybe we're overthinking Georgia struggles and to say Georgia didn't show up because they didn't care, but when Georgia needs to show up, they do. And if Georgia shows up here, LSU is going to have a really tough time, even covering 17. Jake, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, so if you go back and watch the Tennessee LSU episode, whatever week that was, I said the same thing. Jalen Daniels has to be able to run the ball to open up the throwing, because you've got to be worried about that for him to be able to throw the ball, because he's not a great passer. That's not going to happen against Georgia. Georgia's going to really put a stamp on this because, as you talked about, they've not struggled, just disinterested, not really needed the win by 100. And I think with Michigan absolutely taking care of Ohio State at Ohio State, they've got something to play for now, because I think that 1 seed is a little question, like in discussion now. But if they come through here and just absolutely destroy LSU, there won't be no question who's number one. And obviously, when there was a question about who was number one when they played Tennessee, they really got offended that they weren't the number one team and took it out on us. So
that's a great angle there. And I think I said that specifically. I was like, oh boy, I was really concerned about that whole, like, we're going to put Georgia number 3 and Tennessee number 1. I was like, oh boy, y'all better watch out. Something to watch for Tuesday night on the playoff committee ranking, whatever nonsense. Don't actually watch that nonsense. Don't actually justify them putting a TV show for this. It's the dumbest thing ever. Just watch the crawler, okay? Because we don't need to watch them.
There'll be some great basketball
lines anyway. Yeah, they just make up new things every week, right? So don't watch that, but see what the rankings are, and if it is Michigan number 1, Georgia number 2, like that might be another like, oh boy, Georgia's gonna be like, all right, fine, we'll go out, we'll show you who's boss, right?
Yeah. I think that's what might happen, and Georgia will really get mad at LSU for some reason, and then it's just not gonna be pretty.
Yep. All right. Well, speaking of that, we'll jump here to Purdue and Michigan at 8 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. This one will be on Indianapolis, another true neutral site game. According to how I'm treating it, there will be a lot of Purdue fans. It's close. There will be probably more Michigan fans at this one. Sideline says it should be Michigan minus 20.4. We're laying the 16.5 with Michigan. I've got Michigan ranked second here, right behind Georgia. It's pretty close. Got Purdue ranked 38th. The Big Ten West, my goodness, it was everything we hoped and dreamed.
Everything we predicted. Yeah, it's everything we expected. I think
they were who we thought they were. I mean,
yes.
They say what?
When we lift them up to them.
Yeah, the division that nobody wanted to win, and Purdue somehow snuck out of it. Minnesota, I think Minnesota wanted to win it, but the injuries kind of just derailed them a little bit. Wisconsin never got off the ground, even from whatever that was. Week 1, was it with the Washington State game? Week 2, whatever it was, never got off the ground. Iowa, could score. Nebraska left their team in Ireland. I mean, it's just down the list. And Illinois, I think, was the team that got somehow screwed out of this one.
But yes, because if Illinois,
that week 1
touchdown
game,
that was not a touchdown but was a touchdown, that kind of cost them.
Also, can you blame them for doing this? Because who wants to go in and be the punching bag for Michigan or Ohio State?
This is what my dad texted me, was like, nobody wanted, they were all looking at me like, ooh, I don't want to go to that game. Like, we have to travel there and get beat. And then like the plane ride back or the bus ride back or whatever, which would not be enjoyable. Like, let's just stay home. Or also, obviously that's not what happened. It's fun to joke about. Illinois, I think, is the one team, and that would have been a much more fun matchup here. But Cousin Jared, I think that you and I are on the same page here that Michigan's going to score a lot of points and Purdue isn't. Is there anything more to add to that in our analysis of why we're laying the 16.5 with Michigan?
No, not really. All you're really asking Michigan to do is everything that they did in almost every conference game this season, except for maybe the Illinois one. There was some bad weather in that game. Blake Corum got hurt in the second half of that one. And then going back, kind of looking at strange outcomes from the season, when Michigan played literally nobody in non-conference play and then had their first competent team come in, Maryland, only won that game by a touchdown. Outside of that, you're just asking Michigan to do what they did all year. I could definitely see how you could rationalize in your mind this being a letdown spot for Michigan. Obviously big favorite, still expect them to win, but come out slow after the big game against Ohio State and everything. Yeah. But this is the exact same thing that happened last year, and Michigan came out and just absolutely crushed. I think it was Iowa last year that they played, and so
it was over like 8 minutes into the game. I think it was 14-zip Michigan. It was like, well, it's over.
Yeah, and so I think it's going to be the exact same thing this season. Could be a letdown spot, but I just don't see it. Playoff spot on the line for them again. Everything to play for. I think Michigan. This is probably one of my favorite plays of the weekend. I think Michigan's just going to roll.
Yeah, and I guess they're honestly, to be fair, that's a question. Is there a playoff spot on the line if Michigan loses this game? Are they still in? I think they might be, given all the other losses we've seen. In a different year, maybe not. But
more cushion.
Hot take here. Y'all are going to wish y'all hadn't said this. I mentioned this to my father-in-law this weekend, that the loser of Michigan and Ohio State is going to be in a better position to make the playoff than if the winner of that game loses to Purdue. Because whoever loses, if Michigan were to lose to Purdue, that loss is going to be much worse than Ohio State's one loss.
Yeah. But I think at the same time, it was 20 points at home.
That's what I was going to say. I think you're
flip-flop, maybe.
Yeah.
I think you're completely right. If it had been a 3-point game, 100%. And we've seen this exact scenario play out in the past where we kind of been talking about this, like, did you actually not want to play that extra game because all you can do is lose it? You'd rather lose a tight one against a really good team, and the committee just excuses that. But I think the way they lost, I would disagree with that, just because unless Michigan also loses by 20. Yeah, maybe then it's something different.
And I don't think the committee could ignore the head-to-head, but there will be people that bring that up. They'd be like, "Oh, Ohio State's one loss is better than Michigan's one loss." So anyway, that is something that was discussed. But I agree. I think Michigan should be in whether they win or lose this game.
Yeah, and like we said, I think
it's a great point. Brought up arguments to get Tennessee in. So
fair. You brought up a great point about last year. Even more of a letdown spot than this year, because last year was the first time they beat Ohio State in eons. And I have a good friend who's a Michigan fan who told me that, months later, he's still living the high of that game, beating Ohio State, not the conference championship game, the Ohio State, which I think he went to the conference championship game, not that, the Ohio State game. So if there was ever going to be a letdown spot, it was last year against Iowa, and it didn't happen. So not to say that Purdue can't cover. There's no locks and gambling, right? But Michigan's a much better team and probably can destroy Purdue. Jake, what are your thoughts on this one?
I'm passing from it because I think it's a big letdown spot, and Purdue has just had this weird knack where they just show up and like against Ohio State or somebody. What was it last year? They lost to every unranked team, but beat all the ranked teams during conference play. They just do weird things like that.
That sounds Purdue. Yeah, that sounds like Purdue.
Yeah. I'm a little scared of that, and I don't know. So I'm going to stay away from this just because I'm very nervous.
Purdue, beat Illinois, great win. Got beat by 21 to Iowa. Lost by 11 to Wisconsin. Barely beats Nebraska. Barely beats Maryland. Barely beats Minnesota, but a good road win against Minnesota, I guess. Beats Northwestern 17-9. Last week, struggled to put away. Finally did put away Indiana, but struggled in the first half. And that one barely beats Florida Atlantic. Loses to Syracuse. That was, I guess, when Syracuse was decent. Honestly, the most impressive result from Purdue was week 1 of the season when they lost by 4 to Penn State. I mean, that's by far the most impressive results.
I think what I'll say about this is whoever came from the Big Ten West was going to be thrown into the wood chipper. They didn't have a chance to win this game. But I am glad that it is somebody besides Iowa and Wisconsin, just because I feel like we've seen that story so many times. I'm just glad it's somebody different.
I really wish it was Illinois. Illinois almost beat Michigan the first time.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not saying they could, but I think Illinois is the only team from that division that really has a chance against them because their offense is a little bit better than Iowa's and their defense is not far behind it. And I still think Michigan probably wins that game, but that would at least been a little more entertaining. So that's just my wish. But I'm with you. I'm glad at least it's not Iowa. Nothing against Iowa. We love Iowa. They're a really fun team to watch because they're so different. But the problem with them against a team like Michigan or Ohio State is they fall on 14 zip and you're like, it's over. They just don't have the horses to come back. And so that makes for a potentially boring night. The other night game, the ACC game, Clemson and North Carolina.
Game of the week.
Charlotte. The what?
The who cares game of the week.
Yeah. North Carolina, I don't know if they had a shot at the playoff. I think they might have had they beaten whoever it was, Georgia Tech, the week before, I guess, and NC State. They lost both of them. Had they won both of those and had Clemson beaten South Carolina, had those all three things that they lost, had all three things gone differently, you say the winner of this game is like probably – they're not ahead of TCU or USC, I think, but I think they're right on the doorstep of like if one of those falters, like I probably would put them in, or at least they're in the conversation with – one loss Ohio State, 2 loss Alabama, 1 loss ACC. They're in the conversation, and both these teams just crapped the bed. So there's your analysis of this game: is these teams just crapped the bed. This game will be in Charlotte. Again, another game I'm treating as a true neutral site game. Both teams will have fans there. The travel's about the same. I've got Clemson ranked 11th, North Carolina ranked 41st. Sideline says this should be Clemson minus 11.9. Because Jared and I talked about this a little bit before we came on here. My pitch for this on Clemson, really, line the 7.5. I hate that it's north of a touchdown, but honestly, what we've seen in North Carolina, what we've seen in Clemson hasn't been great, but what we've seen in North Carolina, I think, has been worse. Clemson started off a few weeks ago as the better team by a decent margin. And if you talk about anything that Clemson's done, that loss to Notre Dame got kind of wonky with the turnovers. South Carolina, might be decent now, might be good, might be the team the model thought all along was good.
I think you could better summarize that as like if Spencer Rattler is okay now, I think South Carolina's good because I think Rattler was what it was the thing all season. So yes, absolutely. And so at least those are excusable. But North Carolina, losing into State with the struggles they've had, losing to Georgia Tech, I mean, they're just to me much worse. And so to me, I know it's the hook as well, but I just think that this could be ugly because as bad as they both look, I still think if North Carolina plays the way they played the last 2 weeks, I don't care about Clemson's issues. They're going to win this game by 20 points. Jared, what else do you have to add to that? I don't have anything to add. This game makes me sad. I felt like we knew so much about North Carolina, and I feel like every season we want to latch onto those teams that are really exciting, fun to watch. You mentioned Iowa, their defense just unbelievably good, making all these crazy plays to keep them in game. Wake Forest giving up 1 billion points, but also scoring 1 billion points. And you thought that North Carolina was that exact same thing. And I have just been shocked by what I've seen from North Carolina's offense the past few weeks. I just can't believe that they were shut down. I mean, if you told me that North Carolina State slowed them down a little bit, I wouldn't be shocked. But just the way that it played out, just been very, very surprised. And if North Carolina doesn't have the high flying offense, I don't know what to tell you. But Phil Longo, I want to talk with you. There's probably going to be an offensive coordinator vacancy in College Station, Texas. It's a great place to be year-round. I know you've got some coaching experience. You were at Sam Houston for a while. You know the state of Texas. Great people here. So, I'm going to make my plea to you. Just come on back. We'll take you at Texas A&M. We're great people here. Just if Jimbo gives you a call, please listen.
If anyone knows him personally, tell him to watch this segment of the show, I guess. Jake, what do you have on this game?
I just don't trust either team to be motivated to actually show up. I lean North Carolina, but after the way they've looked, I don't want to put money on it. I'm not sure Clemson has any interest in really winning this because who cares if you won the ACC at the way these teams are going? Because North Carolina was going to be in the conversation, had everything played out like it should have, but they crapped the bed twice. Clemson crapped the bed against South Carolina, and so now it's I don't know. I mean, this was even Drake May's Heisman pitch was hey, we were in the playoff conversation, and then his team let him down because he still played well. But it's just, I'm sorry, the whole ACC was just terrible this year, really.
Yeah, it's sad. And I think my thought on North Carolina was if Clemson didn't win the conference last year, so there might be some motivation there as opposed to Clemson having won every year, right? So there might be a little motivation there. If there was going to be motivation for North Carolina, I would have assumed you would have had it against Georgia Tech to stay at one loss, or I would have assumed you would have had it against their rival NC State. So I don't know. I'm sure they're motivated. I know they want to win the conference, but they just apparently can't do it. And their offense is I wonder if their offense is just run its course and they kind of had they were kind of like a one-trick pony and that kind of worked against some of the ACC for a while, and now people figure it out. But I just, with the way their offenses looked, I don't see them scoring hardly at all against Clemson. I'm not sure Clemson scores a ton of points either, but I don't know. I'm trusting the model on this one. Sideline says 12. So we're going to lay the 7.5 officially with Clemson. And one other game to talk about a week from Saturday, Army and Navy. This is a half neutral site game. It is at Army. It's at Philadelphia. It's not at their stadium, but it's right down the road from them. So they are the designated home team. So I'm giving them a half home field advantage. There'll obviously be a lot of Navy fans there. So just a little bit of an edge, not a ton. So that says this should be Army minus 2.7. The early numbers that I'm seeing on this put it 2.5 and 3. So the models pegged this one pretty accurately. But the thing we want to talk about, get on record, it's not out there in a lot of places yet, but there is a 35.5 out there. It's the only total that's out there. So I said all lines courtesy of BetOnline. Except for this one, BetOnline doesn't have a line for this one, but there is a prominent American sports book that does have this line out already. And they've hung 35.5 total. We're going to lock in the under there. Cousin Jared, why is that?
So last season, the model told you to take Army, lay the points with Army. It was about like 7.5 or 8 points. I told you that was way too many points. You need to be back in Navy, and I won that one. You're not getting a lot of points one way or the other here right now. It's a lot of 2.5s and then maybe a couple of 3s out there. Army being favored by 3. So not enough points, but come on, people. 35.5. I mean, nobody. This game is not getting close to 35.5. This is way too far out for weather, but because it's Army Navy, I'm sure there's going to be some devastating snowstorm that comes through. It's going to be about 20 degrees, and the offenses are going to be bogged down on the ice.
Come on, December 10th in Philadelphia is known for being warm and pleasant and sunny.
No. Okay. So yeah, keep telling yourself that. But yeah, under 35.5. These, we've talked about it many times. These academy games love to go under. Can't believe this is over. 5 touchdowns here. I'm really shocked. And so, yeah, I think this is a great play. I just see this being a close, low scoring game that you need to watch every year, because it's just going to be a close, exciting game in the fourth quarter. Almost no doubt about it.
Yeah. It feels like 10-7. And we've talked about when a service academy plays a service academy, we talked about the trend. Listen, I do not buy into trends from 5 years ago most of the time, because it's a whole different set of players. And most of the time it's a different coach. But the service academy under trend holds and makes sense, not because of coaches and not because of players, but because the styles are the exact same. When you see a triple option offense that wants to take every second of the play clock against a triple option offense that wants to take every second of the play clock, when you have these two teams who don't want to play fast against each other, there's a synergistic effect, and you almost can't model the number of possessions correctly, but it like drops through the floor. And when you have fewer possessions because they're long and slow, somebody's going to have like a 9-minute drive that's going to land with like a failed fourth down at the like 11. When you have stuff like that, you just can't get a lot of points. So again, there's no locks in gambling. Of the trend of the service academies, there's been a couple of games that have randomly gone over. I don't think it's this one. I think both the defenses are better than the offenses in this case. Air Force at least was going to be the chance for one of these to go over, because Air Force's offense is a little bit better, and that didn't go over when they played either one of these teams.
But that's just what I was going to say. In the rare circumstance where one of these academy games have gone over, I mean, like 3/4 of the time, it's been Air Force involved in the game. So these two teams, it's even a stronger correlation of going under.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the number keeps getting lower and lower every year. It keeps going under, and at some point, there are groups out there that are just going to say it's too low and back the over. I think you still got to go under. I still don't think it's low enough. I think it's a situation where, like I talked about, any of these totals in the 30s, they don't always hit, but more times than not, they do. They're greater than 50% overall, because the sportsbooks know they can't make the line too low, or they're going to get so much money. They'll be way in balance on the over. Under 35.5 is a great play for us. Jake, do you have any insight for us on this one?
Yeah, play the under. I would have played the under if it was at 5. It's just outrageous that like how these things work. I swear there's a handshake deal between all 3 of the academies. They're like, we're all going to run the triple option. We're all going to take all the time, and we're just not going to score any points, and we're going to play boring football. So until I'm proven otherwise, I believe that deal happened somewhere in the past, and everybody has to live up to it.
Well, since you mentioned it, we did talk about it before we started recording. I think like 31 is our number. We're like, oh yeah, if it's 31, we'd still probably play under at 31. If it goes below 31, then we're like, maybe.
At that point, you probably pass, but you still don't play the over.
No,
right?
no.
You don't throw that money away. And again, there's no locks in gambling, right? So again, preface it with that. We just think this is a really smart play. The last thing I want to say about this is, if you are going to convince me that the under was the reason, that the under was the right play for these teams historically, and that's been because historically one team has been a lot better than the other, I could start buying that argument. I could start buying the argument that yes, in most of these games, last year was Army, but for the last couple of years been Army. For so many years recently was Navy, was the by far better team. And you're talking about spreads that are 10, 14 points, 17 points, and you could maybe convince me, well, the underdog is really going slow to try to keep it a low position game to have a chance. And a lot of times that has pulled the upset, right? In recent years, Navy had that long stretch where they won all those, but in recent years, it has been a little bit more upset driven. But when you go and you look at the games like involving Air Force, where it's been a under 7 spread, the same thing has happened. It hasn't mattered if it's been a 14-point spread or a 6-point spread or a 3-point spread. These teams just play slow. It's not about, we don't think we can win or we think we have to use to win. That's just how they are. And like I said, there's a synergistic effect here when these two teams play, or when these service academies play each other. So under 35.5 is our official play. That wraps up this episode. Any parting words, Cousin Jared?
This is a fun week. Just like Conference Championship week, get the extra bonus game early on a Friday afternoon. Who's not looking for some college football on a Friday afternoon? Who cares if it's just Akron and Buffalo? And then you got fall next week with the Heisman Trophy ceremony and the Army-Navy game. Soak in the last few bits of college football season that we have, because it'll be gone before we know it.
And again, the way Buffalo has blown the last several games, tune in to see if Buffalo blows their bullshit. Like it's intriguing TV. It's not just about like we think you should put someone in the over and have some rooting interest, but like I don't know, Buffalo has been kind of wild. Like it could be interesting, right? It's like there's some intrigue in that game. Jake, parting words from you.
Yeah, this is the first year that I can remember in a while that there was so much chaos in the 2 weeks preceding this, that the chaos is still here this week. So I'm all for it. Give me all the craziness, because I just love to see when people just have it in their hands and throw it away, because then I know I'm not the only one that roots for a team that hasn't throws it away.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like one of those. 2007 was the other year. I think we all talk about that. Was so crazy. It feels kind of like, not maybe quite that much, but the closest to that I can remember. There probably was one other year, but yeah, it hasn't happened often where it's been quite this chaotic. Last thing, real quick, I want to mention we will have a show next week when the playoff is announced. We will get that out for you on Sunday night, just like usual. And so we'll talk about those playoff games. And then after that, we'll have episodes cover every single bowl game. So lots to look forward to there. And of course, all the college basketball action. We'll get Cousin Jared on here again at some point. And otherwise, Jake will be with us giving out picks.
And Cousin Jared will be on the TikToks throwing out bowl games, from what I understand.
I'm eventually going to have to do it.
There we go. There we go. All right. Well, thank y'all for tuning into this episode of Picks the Professor. Don't forget to subscribe so you can ensure all the sports betting content we run on this channel is dropped right into your feed. I'll be back all week with college basketball betting content. Until we see you again, as always, best of luck. And remember, you can eat your betting money, but please don't bet your eating money.